Okay, Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. So, selamat berpuasa dan kita hari ni akan sambung kita punya kelas dengan masih lagi chapter 2. If before this we have learned about organizing and graphing the qualitative data or ungrouped data. Okay, so hari ni kita akan continue with organizing and graphing the quantitative data ataupun quantitative data is a group data. Okay, so a simple way to organize the quantitative data is by arranging the data in order of magnitude from the lowest to the highest value, but this is time consuming. And then if we have a quantitative data, means we have a value, because quantitative data is always in a numeric number, in numeric form. Okay, which is in the form of number. So bila kita ada form of number ni, selalunya kita ada value yang mana lagi tinggi, yang mana lagi kecil. Yang mana lagi kecil, yang mana lagi tinggi. Okay, but then untuk kita susun satu-satu mengikut order is a time consuming, tambah-tambah kalau dia melibatkan data yang banyak. So a more reasonable approach to overcome the problem is by grouping the data into classes. So one of the method on how to organize the quantitative data is by grouping the data into classes. So kita make a few classes, okay, a few classes, and then we group the data accordingly, according to the class. Okay, so that one is known as a frequency table or frequency distribution. But then before we go for the about frequency distribution, okay, we want to see a few terminologies, a few terms that is important related to the frequency distribution. The first one is class limit. So what is the class limit? Class limit ni adalah n value of class interval. So you have a class interval. Class interval ini berdasarkan kepada data. Okay, berdasarkan kepada data kita. Contohnya data kita tu mempunyai nilai 5 sampai 20. So kita jadikan dia sebagai kelas-kelas. Okay, untuk kita groupkan dia. Okay, so kita ada kelas interval. Yang pertama, kelas yang pertama adalah 5 to 8, and then the second class is 9 to 12, and then 13 to 16, and 17 to 20. Okay, so we have 4 classes here. So this is called as a class interval. Okay, interval untuk class. Okay, so what is a class limit? N value of a class is a class limit. So kita ada n value of each class. Sekarang kita ada 4 kelas. This one is the n value for the class. Okay, and this one also the n value of the class. Okay, so the one lower here is called as a lower limit, while the one higher in that class is called as a upper limit. Okay, limit bawah dan limit atas. Okay, so setiap kelas, end of the class, bawah dan atas, hujung dan mula, kita panggil dia sebagai class limit. Okay, the one yang smaller value we call as a lower class limit, and the higher value we call as a upper class limit. Okay, so kalau awak tengok dekat kelas yang pertama tu, kita ada limit dia 5 sampai 8. So 5 adalah lower limit dan 8 adalah upper limit untuk kelas yang pertama. Dan 9 adalah lower limit, 12 adalah upper limit untuk kelas yang kedua. So that one is the class limit. And then we have a class boundary. So what is a class boundary? Class boundary is a midpoint of the upper limit of one class and the lower limit of the next class. You need to be careful with the definition. Okay, it is a midpoint between the upper limit of the class and the lower limit of the next class. Okay, maksudnya class boundary ini adalah apa yang awak kena buat adalah ambil the upper limit, tambahkan dengan the lower limit, bahagi dengan 2. But then you need to be careful because it's the lower limit of the next class, not the same class, the next class. So 9 plus 8 is 17. 17 divided by 2 is 8.5. Okay, that's why you have the boundary here 8.5. Okay, and then you start again with the 8.5. Okay, this one you will take the upper limit from the class to be the lower limit for the next class, and the upper boundaries for this class is by taking the upper limit plus with the lower limit divided by 2. 12 plus 13 is 25. 25 divided by 2 is 12.5. So it becomes the upper boundaries here. And then the lower boundaries of the next class is the same. We just take the upper boundary of the previous class. Okay, and the upper boundary of this class is the upper limit plus with the lower limit of the next class divided by 2. So 16 plus 17 is 33. 33 divided by 2 is 16.5. So this one become the upper limit. And for the next class, the lower boundary will take this value, okay, and the upper boundary will take the value of 20 plus the lower limit of the next class divided by 2. Okay, so how come we know the lower limit of the next class is by looking at the pattern. So kalau awak tengok dekat pattern, dia daripada 5 sampai 8. Dia punya size 3. So dia punya size adalah 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so 9 sampai 12 size dia 4, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So the next class will be 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, therefore 20 plus 21 is 41. 41 divided by 2, and then you get the upper boundaries here. That is how we use the formula to calculate the upper boundary. But then, the class boundary. But then you have another method on how to find the class boundary. Ada cara lain macam mana nak cari class boundary. Okay, class boundary ini adalah 0.5 sebelum dan 0.5 selepas. 0.5 sebelum apa? 0.5 sebelum apa? Okay, you already have your lower limit and your upper limit, right? You already have your lower limit and your upper limit here. So, apa dia class boundaries? Class boundaries ini adalah 0.5 sebelum lower limit dan 0.5 selepas upper limit. So, this one is your lower limit for the first class. So 0.5 sebelum 5. Maksudnya you tolaklah 5 tolak 0.5, you will get 4.5. And 0.5 selepas upper limit. So the upper limit is 8. 0.5 selepas 8 is 8.5. 0.5 sebelum 9, 8.5. 0.5 selepas 12, 12.5. 0.5 sebelum 13, 12.5. 0.5 selepas 16, 16.5. 0.5 sebelum 17, 16.5. 0.5 selepas 20, 20.5. So that is how you find the class boundary the other way. Okay, you can use the formula, or you can take the hint where the class boundary is actually 0.5 before lower limit and 0.5 after upper limit. Okay, so you will get 2 class boundary for each class, and the one lowest here we call as a lower class boundary, and the one with the highest value in that class is called as a upper class boundary. Okay, so it's equal to the upper limit and lower limit. For each class, you will have the lower class boundary and the upper class boundary. This one is the lower class boundary for the second class, and this one is the upper class boundary for the second class. This one is the lower class boundary for the third class, and this one is the upper class boundary for the third class. And this one is the lower class boundary for the last class, and this one is the upper class boundary for the last class. So that one is class boundary. The first one you need to know is class interval. The second one is class limit, where we have a lower limit and upper limit. And then we just see about class boundary. We also have the lower class boundary and upper class boundary. Now we want to see a class width. Width ni dia punya size class. So the class width is actually the distance from one lower class limit to the next lower class limit, or one upper class limit to the next upper class limit. Okay, so it's either you see the distance between lower class limit with the next class limit. For example, you have here lower class limit. The first one is 5 and the second one is 9. So the distance between 9 and 5 is 4. Okay, or else you can also see the distance between upper class with the upper class. So you have upper class here is 8. To the next upper class is 12, so 12 minus 8 is also 4. 13 minus 9 is also 4. This one is 4. 17 minus 13 is also 4. 12 minus 8 is also 4. 16 minus 12 is also 4. 20 minus 16 is also 4. So this one is the class width, size kelas. Okay, size kelas adalah lower limit tolak dengan lower limit sebelumnya. Ataupun the other way untuk kita mencari size kelas adalah you take the upper boundary for one class, you minus with the lower boundary. Awak ambil je mana-mana kelas, okay, kalau awak nak check, ataupun awak boleh tengok satu-satu, because sometimes yang ini kebetulan dia sama, sometimes kelas size tak sama. Class width ni adalah class size. So class size ni sometimes dia tak sama untuk semua kelas. So how can you find the class width? One other method is by taking the upper boundary minus with the lower boundary. 8.5 minus 4.5. So you have the class width is 4. 12.5 minus 8.5, the class width is 4. 16.5 minus with 12.5, the class width is 4. And 20.5 minus with 16.5, your class width is 4. So that is a class width or a class size. Okay, so how can you find the class width and the class size? Is either you use the lower limit minus with the previous class lower limit, or you can just minus the lower boundary with the upper boundary for each class to get the size of the class or the class width. Alright, so next what we want to see is the class midpoint. Midpoint ni adalah titik tengah. So how can we find our class midpoint? Ada dua formula. If you see here, the first formula is upper class limit plus lower class limit divided by 2. So your upper class is 8 plus with 5. Okay, so you have 13 divided by 2, you have 6.5. So here is your midpoint. Upper class plus with the lower class, 12 plus 9 is 21. 21 divided by 2 is 10.5. Okay, or you can use this formula, upper class boundary plus lower class boundary divided by 2. So your upper class boundary, let's say for this one is 16.5 plus with 12.5, so you have 29. So 29 divided by 2, you get the midpoint as 14.5. 20 plus 5 plus 16 plus 5 is 37. So 37 divided by 2 is 18.5. Or you can also use the first formula here, where the upper limit plus with the lower limit, 20 plus 17 is 37, and divide by 2, so 37 divided by 2 is 8.5. So either one is correct to find the midpoint of the class. Alright? Okay class, so this is the frequency distribution. Just now we see one example of frequency distribution on how to find the class boundaries, class width, and also the class midpoint. How about if we have the frequency, the interval of the class like this, 3 less than 7. Okay, 3 less than 7. So dia punya bentuk kelas interval, kalau tadi contohnya 3 sampai 7, 7 sampai 11 contoh. Tapi sekarang dia guna bentuk 3 less than 7. Okay, 3 less than 7, 7 less than 11, ataupun dalam kes yang sama, 3 more than 7, 7 more than 11. Okay, so kalau dia guna less than or more than, so the class interval itself is actually the class boundaries. Kenapa? Sebab kalau awak tengok dalam kes kita sebelum ni, if we have the interval in this form 3 to 7, 7 to 11, how to find class boundaries? Lower class boundaries is 0.5 before our lower limit. So kalau lower limit kita 3, 0.5 before 3 is 2.5. So this one is our lower boundary. And the upper boundary will be 0.5 after the upper limit. So this one the upper limit. So 0.5 after 7 is 7.5. And for the next class, the upper boundary will be 0.5 before 7, so it's 6.5, and 0.5 after 11 for the upper boundary, which is will become 11.5. So this one is the class boundary. And if you see, the class boundary is actually the value that is not included in the class interval. Value tu tak termasuk dalam class interval sebab class interval kita bermula dengan 3 sampai 7 sahaja. Boundary 2.5 sampai 7.5 is not included in the class interval. Okay, kalau kita dapat dalam form macam ni. Kalau kita dapat dalam form less than or more than, if we said that 3 less than 7, okay, data kita memang dah tak include 3 dengan 7 unless dia guna perkataan less than or equal. Okay, less than or equal. But then if dia guna hanya perkataan less than, okay, 3 and less than 7 means it's not included in the class interval itself. Therefore, it will be our lower boundary and our upper boundary. So the class boundary will be 3 to 7. Okay, this one, the class boundary will be 7 to 11. This one 11 to 17. This one is 17 to 22. Okay, so you just need to remember that if you have a class interval in the form of less than or more than, the class boundary is actually equal to the class interval. Okay, so now we want to find the class width. So now we want to find the class width. So how to find the class width? The class width is the distance from lower class limit to the next lower class limit. So our class limit now is 3. Okay, so to the next 7, so the distance will be 4. Okay, so the class width is 4, and then 7 to 11 is also 4. Okay, 11 to 17 is 6. Okay, and the next class will be 22 here, right? Because this one is 22, so 17 to 22 will be 5. So this one is the class width. So if you see, the class width is sometimes difference. Okay, difference between the class. So you need to check. Please don't just copy the first class width. Kita kena check. Okay, kita kena check. So sometimes dia punya class width adalah different. Okay, so now class midpoint. So how to find class midpoint is either upper class limit tambah dengan lower class limit divided by 2, or upper class boundary plus with lower class boundary divided by 2. But then now you have the same class limit and class boundary. You just add 3 plus 7 is 10 divided by 2 is 5. 7 plus 11 is 18 divided by 2 is 9. Okay, 11 plus 17 is 28 divided by 2 will be 14. 17 plus 22 will be 39 divided by 2 will be 19.5. So this one is your class midpoint. Okay. So this is how you find the class boundary, class width, and class midpoint for the case that you have your class interval in the form of less than and more than. You just need to remember that the less than and more than case will give you the same class boundary as the class limit. Okay, class limit dan class boundary sama bila you deal dengan case less than or more than. Okay.